And now to our second thesis about the future of learning. This is another provocative proposition about what could be a fundamental change in our learning environments. And the proposition is that in the future, there will be no distinction between instruction and assessment. Now, again, seems like a pretty definitive statement about the future. We can't make definitive statements about the future, but the proposition is one where we really mean to say that this might be possible and perhaps it should be possible. This is what we did for assessment in the old school. Here we have an exam. In fact, this went viral on the internet. You may have seen it before. It's an examination in Thailand where you can see that the classic kind of expectation is that students will have remembered things individually themselves. So we have in that traditional classroom the teacher speaking, the student listening, the textbook telling, the student remembering. So we have a whole lot of exercises around remembering where when you come to an exam, you're in this very strange artificial environment with a strange set of artifacts where the artifacts of assessment are actually very different from and separate from the artifacts of learning. What are the fundamental epistemological presuppositions here? Learning is memory work, and particularly it's what's called long-term memory work. And what's the definition of long-term? The definition of long-term is until the day after the exam. You've got to get through the exam and, maybe some of it sticks afterwards, but from an assessment point of view, it's until the day of the exam. Now, one of the questions that we might ask about this is just how relevant is memory? So look, here in my pocket here, I've got my phone, there's my phone, and in fact, there's nothing in the world that I can't find out through that phone. There's nothing in the world that I can't calculate through that phone. The kinds of memory I might have might be empirical memory, or it might be memories about procedures, which is how to get the right answer and to calculate something. Well, in fact, we now have these devices in our pockets. We have computers on our desks. We have tablets that we carry around with us in work situations increasingly. And what do you have to remember? Well, in fact, you don't have to remember much except the skills of navigation, the skills of looking up, right? So in other words, you have to remember a certain number of procedures, but they're fundamentally different from the kinds of things that the students in that picture that we just looked at were remembering in order to pass their exam. The other thing too is that all the students are in that classroom and the measure of their learning is templated sameness. So the classic modern form of assessment is the standardized test. Standardization means everybody gets the same test. It's more or less appropriate to them. Some kids are going to not do very well because they don't quite know enough, and some kids are going to know a bit more. But there's a kind of idea that within a particular frame of reference, this test is a standard measure which measures everybody against a measure of uniformity. And also the standard of knowledge is empirical correctness. I remember a fact correctly, I get an answer right, and so on. Now, you know well as I do that in fact, knowledge and learning isn't quite like that. And in fact, what we have with the test is a very, very, very strange artifact. So we go into the test, and in fact, let's just take the item-based test. So we go into the test, and there's an unusual game being played there, which is not played anywhere else in the world and not played in the rest of learning for that matter, which is, we've got an A, B, C, D answer. And in fact, you have to eliminate things which are obviously wrong. And you've got to know that the other items, particularly at least one item, is what's called the distractor item. It's an item which looks right, but deliberately designed to trick you. So it's playing a game of trickery essentially, which is how do you get the right answer and how do you find out the trick in the distractor item or distractor items. So it's a very, very strange thing to be doing in order for there to be one answer, which might be, let's say B, which is either a fact or it's empirically correct. Now, you know as well as I do that you can get the right answer by guesswork and not understand the underlying principles. You know as well as I do that you can actually say the distractor item is correct because you understand the underlying principles, but there's some small piece of trivia that you overlooked. So you've got the concept, but in fact you're marked wrong. So these things are pretty strange artifacts and often reasonably inaccurate.